This is Bob Bloom, lead organizer of GTA PHP or Region PHP in Laravel Toronto. On June 10th, 2021, we were fortunate to have Ben Ramsey present Dev Tools for PHP. I split this recording into two parts 1 and 2. He has about 70 odd links in his slideshow. I have these links on my website. The link is in the notes of this video.
That you could do that, but maybe they've changed it or something. Thank you very much, Bob. My name is Ben Ramsey, and we're going to talk about cool tools for PHP development. And mainly just because the word cool and tools rhymes. But we will be talking about tools. Bob's already talked a little bit about me. I am the maintainer of Ramsey UUID, and there's a bunch of other packages I maintain too, but that's the one that I have the most downloads of and likes of. But Bob also mentioned the Composer, I think it's Composer install is the name of that GitHub action. I am also a PHP 8.1 release manager. And in fact, today we published the very first alpha release for 8.1. That is now out, and it's 8.1.0 alpha 1. So if you go to php.net, one of the first new items, if not the first, should be about that. If you look at the news file or the upgrade file, you can find out some of the newer changes that are coming in it. Some of the biggest ones, I think the biggest one that's on my mind really is enums. I have found myself wanting to use them more and more, and in some of my work documentation, like on our Confluence page, I've already started documenting some things as enums, even though we can't use them yet. But I've already got them in the the code examples. I am a Nashville PHP co-organizer, and I work at Skillshare. I'm a staff engineer there. And I have the ubiquitous we're hiring slide because I'm happy. I'm a happy employee at Skillshare, and I'm glad that they are very community minded and are very supportive of these kinds of efforts and user group meetings and conferences and that sort of thing. So we have job openings for engineering. And we have a big pipeline of them too right now. So even if there's not a job on our job listings right now, there might be a job, even if there's not a job in the job listings that looks interesting to you or applicable to you, there might be one that's in the pipeline that hasn't been published yet publicly. And if that's the case, or that is most likely the case, and I have a lawnmower in the background I'm very sorry about. But yeah, just get in touch if it looks like a company that you're interested in. We probably have something in the pipeline for you. And if you're interested, you can always send an email to me or ping me on Twitter or wherever that I'm available. And I'll be happy to talk and share information with you. So this talk is about tooling. It's more about tooling than it is the specific tools. And specifically, it's around developer experience. And developer experience is this term that I've personally only recently become aware of in the last few years, maybe the last 5 years, but it still seems very recent to me that I became aware of this term. And people are talking about it a lot more. It's becoming more and more talked about, especially in the DevRel community. And mainly because when companies open source their SDKs and their libraries and their tools, they want to make sure that developers who use them have a good developer experience, kind of like a good user experience for your UI. But also, when you're working internally with your own tools, it's helpful for your own company and for yourself, even if you're not on a huge team of people, it's helpful to have a good developer experience as part of your tooling. So what do I mean when I say developer experience? I hinted at user experience a minute ago. That's a term that a lot of us have heard, I'm sure, because we might work with designers and user experience experts. But developer experience sort of follows along with that user experience concept, except it's on the side of people who are building the products rather than consuming the products. So DEX, this is a paper that was written 9 years back. And at the time, they were calling it DEX. Now we call it DX. But DEX consists of experiences related to all kinds of artifacts and activities that a developer may encounter as part of their involvement in software development. So the authors of this paper divide that into 3 categories. One is development infrastructure. The second one is a psychological thing, feelings about your work, how you feel about the work you do. And the third thing is also psychological, but social as well. And that is how you perceive the value of your own contribution. So the thing I want to, well, actually, let me go forward a little bit. They also divided it into a chart that looks like this, which I think is a little bit easier to look at instead of that wall of text. And they have it, you can see the pie here is 3 big sections. And they've broken it down into cognition, affect, and conation, which I may or may not be pronouncing correctly. Under cognition, you ask the question, how do developers perceive the development infrastructure? Under affect or affection, you ask, how do developers feel about their work? And I mentioned the contribution as being the social part. Actually, the affect part here is also a social part because it's about how you relate to your team, if you have a team. And then the last one is conation, which is how do developers see the value of their contribution, which I think is really important, not only in, I mean, it's very important in a company situation, but a lot of us are working in open source, and that's an even bigger part where we might see our contribution having value beyond just the company we work for. It might have value to many, many others. And so this also involves your goals and your plans and your intention. What I want to focus on in this talk, while I think all 3 of these are very interesting and they're all important, and you could give whole talks on each one of these 3, I want to focus on the cognition part. That's how you perceive the infrastructure. Because a lot of the times when we talk about DX, we really mean tools, the tools we use. And so I want to focus on the tooling around those tools and talk about how we can make a better developer experience within our own companies and within our own teams using those tools. I've already gone over this, but again, cognition is how do developers perceive the development infrastructure, and that's really what I want to focus on here. So how do you perceive the development infrastructure where you work or on the projects you work on if you're a freelancer? Do your tools get in the way? Or are they a joy to use? Or do they spark joy? If they don't spark joy, maybe you need to get rid of them. As the Netflix show says. I can't remember the name of that show, by the way. I need to put it in my notes. The better experience the developer has with their tools, the idea here is that they'll be more efficient and happy. And there is research to show that this is true. This is not just a hypothesis anymore. It is a hypothesis, but there's a lot of research that's been done to prove the hypothesis multiple times. And that's why I went looking through papers and on research on this. But I don't want to get bogged down in like the research because it is important to know that when you have a good experience, really with anything, you're going to be happier with it. And the same thing goes for the tools you're using when you're developing. So cool tools. Let's talk about what I mean by cool tools. What are they? Well, first of all, not listed on this slide, cool tools rhymes. So it's a really cool title for a presentation. But the tools that I'm talking about are the tools you need to do your job, the tools that make your job easier, and the tools that bring joy to your work. And that might sound flippant, but it can be really simple as having colors in the output of your, of the tool when it's running in your CLI. That sounds really, really weird, and we might even make fun of that sometimes. I say that because I make fun of it sometimes, but I like colors in the output of my CLI tools. It helps things stand out better. I also like emojis in the output of my CLI tools. I do make fun of those too, but they do bring a little sense of joy to the work you're doing in some ways. And if they don't for you, that's okay. It doesn't, like, joy is different for every person. So you kind of have to find out what the things are that you want to see your tools do that kind of make a joyful experience out of using those tools. That's really what I'm getting at there. So our focus for this talk is how can you create better workflows for the tools you already use? Programming is a team sport. So how can you share these same workflows with your team? And in other words, how can you improve your DX? So I want to do some live coding right now. And I know that live coding is one of those things that everyone who gives presentations likes to joke about failures of live coding. I gave this talk the other day to Nashville PHP, and I think I worked out some of the kinks. So we'll see what happens. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my full screen, and I will share. Let's see if I can share an individual window. I think we can do that. Aha, there is a way to do that. All right, so you should see a terminal window right now. I hope that the text is big enough. If it's not big enough, let me know.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right, I've already set up a repository for this. We're going to take a look at, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that I just like to bring in right away. And these are tools that you might even use as well. And then we'll get to talking about workflow. So let's talk about these first. The tools I'm going to bring in are pretty standard nowadays and a lot of open source packages at least, but also you might use them in your own local development work for whatever projects you're working on. They are PHPUnit, PHP Code Sniffer, Psalm, which is a static analysis tool, and also PHPStan, which is another static analysis tool. They overlap in a lot of ways, but sometimes I like to use both of them still anyway. So I'm going to require these using composer require --dev. Actually, before I do that, let me just show you what's in here. So that yellow is a little hard to see. I apologize. I went ahead and brought in some default configuration for PHP Code Sniffer, PHPStan, PHPUnit, and Psalm, just so that it's there. And there's a CaptainHook.json. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right. So some people prefer PHP CS Fixer. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the important things right now is I've just set up a source directory, a test directory, and these, actually it would have been better just to do this. These just have example.php and example test. So this is a very simple starting project. Nothing too complex about it. My composer JSON is very simple. I went ahead and set this up beforehand just so that it's available, but I don't have anything in require or required dev right now. I did set minimum stability to dev and prefer stable to true. This is because some of the packages I'm pulling in for this talk they have dependencies that require your minimum stability to be dev. If you set it to dev and don't set prefer stable to true, then it's going to pull the dev main or dev master, the latest from every package you pull in. You don't want that. You want to prefer stable. So that's why I have that in here. Your project may or may not have those. I am not advocating for or against you doing that. That's up to you. It's just in here so that later when I pull things in, we don't see errors all over the place. All right, so I'm going to require these 4 packages I mentioned. You'll pull them down, install them. It'll set up my Composer lock file. You know the drill if you've used Composer before. Now that they're available, I can go in here and run PHPUnit. And there's only one test and one insertion, so it passes. I can run PHP code sniffer. Whoops. I have to remember that it's in my vendor bin directory, right? There are 2 files. Both of them pass my coding standards, which right now are just set to PSR 12. And then I've got, Psalm. So I got to remember to type vendor bin Psalm. And if you didn't have your other files set up already, you would have to pass some command line parameters to these and remember how to do that. All right, Psalm doesn't detect any static analysis errors. And then PHPUnit is in vendor bin here. And I did that as well. Yep. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then vendor bin PHPStan. All right, so everything came out, no errors. That's all good. I wanted to mention this. I have everything in vendor bin because I required everything using Composer. But there's another school of thought around the tools you use that is, you shouldn't require them with Composer, but you should use either a global version of the tool or you should use like a static package of the tool. And so Sebastian Bergman and his fellow associates at the PHPCC, as well as a whole group of others, they're not the only ones, have put together a project called Five, which is PHIVE. And let me see if I can find the URL for it. I meant to put this in my notes. So actually it's at, it's at far.io. And I will paste this here in the chat. If I can find the chat, here we go. So far.io offers a different way of using tools. And I won't go into that here. They have a different school of thought. And the reason they want to package everything as a FAR file and then you use that FAR file directly is mainly because sometimes the tools you're using might have conflicts with versions of packages that you need to use for production. And so they advocate that the tools you use should be standalone and separate so that there's no conflict there. I've personally not had huge problems with that, though I know of people who have had big problems. with relying on tools that they've required with Composer and conflicts with other versions of packages they're using. So that is why far.io exists and 5, which is the executable part of the project. So you can find out more about it there. All right. I'll come back to PHPCS Fixer because we'll talk a little bit more about some different tools in a little bit later. But right now, I wanted to, first of all, talk about workflows now. So I went through and ran each of these tools that I use. I use these tools on a regular basis. So how can I make it easier for me to run? I shouldn't have to run all 4 of these. Well, there's a variety of different ways we can make it easier, right? We could write a bash script that runs them all. What I want to talk about, though, is using Composer scripts. So in your Composer JSON, there you can add a script property that is another key value pair entity, or whatever you want to call it. And I just lost my train of thought. I'm very sorry. It's another key value. It's another object. So scripts is a JSON object. Each property on that object refers to a script or a list of scripts that you want to run when you call this. I'll get to calling it in a minute. The value of each property can be either a string, which is the exact command to run. It can be a command line command, or it can be a fully qualified class name with a callable, like a static method to some PHP code that you have as part of your project. And as long as it's included as part of the autoloader, when you call it, Composer will know how to run it. The other thing it can be is an array of strings. And that each string in that array can be like a CLI command, or it can be a PHP static function that can be called. So I'm going to use an array here of strings. And I want to basically create a single command that I can run that will do all 4 of those commands that I just ran without having to remember that they're in vendor bin and so forth. So when you do this here, because it's in the context of Composer, Composer knows where to find them in vendor bin. So you don't have to specify that location. So we're going to do PHPCS first. And the order of this really doesn't matter. It's up to you how they like the order that they should run in. I kind of tend to like to do my coding standards first, then my static analysis next, and then my unit tests, but it's really personal preference. So I'll do PHPStan next, Psalm, and PHPUnit. And I'm not passing any CLI arguments or options to these because I'm relying on the fact that I already have the configuration in my repository. So now anything that's in the scripts object, you can call it with Composer using the name you gave it. So I gave that the name test. I could have given it the name foo or whatever. And as long as I call it with Composer with that name, it's going to execute what was in that array or in that string like this. So Composer run script test knows to run anything that's in the scripts. A shortcut, though, to that is Composer test. I don't have to call run dash script. I can just call Composer test. It will know what to do. It finds it and then runs it. The only problem that you might have there is if there's a collision with the names. If there's already a Composer command with the same name as you're adding for a script, you might have to call run dash script in order to execute it properly. And so I've got this here. We've talked about, oops, talked about the scripts here, and I can put any number of scripts here. They can do all sorts of things. I can just say, you know, hello, whoops, and it'll echo hello, right? And this is just, you know, a simple bash command. It echoes hello. It also tells me what it's going to do. So it actually shows the command that it's executing right here. So you can see that up here as well. It's showing you the command it's executing. Whoops. All right. There are some better ways that we can go about this, though. We can actually dive deeper into Composer and create our own plugins to share with our team. Now, the important thing, though, is like this is in your composer.json, so you can do most everything that you need to do right there just by putting all the commands there. When you commit it to your repository, it shares it with your team. Any of them can run it as well. But I do want to show how Composer plugins work, because you can go a little deeper and do this with a plugin. So I'm going to use an example plugin that I created myself. Shameless self-promotion here. This is Ramsey/composer-REPL. We'll add it to our --dev. Now what this does is it is a Composer plugin. So once we've required it like this, when I run Composer now, it knows some other things that it didn't know before. It has more commands than it had before. So now if I type composer list, there is a new command up here. Actually, there's two new ones, but they're aliases. So there is a REPL command, which launches a development console for PHP, and a shell command, which is just an alias for that, in case it's easier to remember the word shell over REPL. So if we type composer REPL, it launches a REPL. REPL stands for read eval print loop. And the idea is that it reads input, evaluates that input, prints the output of that input, and then loops and waits for more input. So that's where the term comes from. So this is a REPL that is using SciShell by Justin Heilemann. And it is a really cool REPL. I would encourage you to check it out. PHP has a built-in interactive mode if you type PHP-A that allows you to type PHP code and then it'll execute it. But it has to be like fully, what's the word I'm looking for? It has to be fully correct. So it has to end in semicolons. It has to look like code that you would type into a script that you're going to run. So it has to pass a lint check, essentially, no syntax errors, while SciShell is a little bit more forgivable in that sense. And then PHP-A does not have access to like your auto-loaded environment. Whereas here with SciShell, it is pulling in our Composer autoload. So I actually have access to all of the things that I've required with Composer and to my own code here. So remember, I pointed out there was an example script. So our example class. So if I say example equals new, I still have to use the fully qualified class name, or I can actually I can do a use statement. Show that. So now I can say example equals new example, and I can say example. Actually, I forgot what my method name was, and so I'll show you that if you hit tab, it will autocomplete or show you all the methods it has. There's only one method in this class, so it auto-completed it. So I can say bin, and then when I execute it, it says it returns hello bin. So I'm mainly showing this off not because I want to encourage you to use the REPL, but I'm showing how to use it, how to do Composer plugin. So let's take a look at the Composer plugin code briefly, so you can just see how kind of simple or how little code it is really. So we'll jump over. I'm going to stop sharing and share a different screen. And you probably hear my wife in the background. She's chatting on Discord with friends. I didn't realize I have my noise cancellation turned on, so I don't hear the background noises that the microphone is picking up. All right. Let's see. Whoops. It would be helpful if I have, here we go. All right. So I've got open here the GitHub page for Composer-REPL. I've increased the size of the font here just so that it makes it a little easier to see. Pay no attention to the potential security vulnerabilities in your dependencies here. That's not there. If you load this, you won't see that. That's only like maintainers see that. The dependency that it's talking about is Composer, because there was a security vulnerability in Composer/Composer. And I've not released an update that uses, I think 2.13 is the release that it needs to be on. So that's why that's there. Not a huge deal there. I mean, security vulnerability is a huge deal, but not a huge deal for right now. All right, so this is Composer-REPL. If we, I want to try to gloss over, because there's a little bit more that it's doing than what a normal, like a standard plugin has to do. So I don't want to dig too much into those things, but I did want to go talk about what's in this Composer folder here. And that is, I have a REPL command, which is a Composer command, and I have REPL plugin, which helps set up the plugin for Composer. Let's look at the REPL command first. This is implementing a Composer command, which essentially is a Symfony command. So if you're familiar with creating Symfony console applications, this will look very familiar to you because it is extending the Symfony console command way up the chain. But in this case, the base command I'm using is the Composer command, a base command. We don't have to look at the constructor because that's not really important for the discussion here. We have a configure. Again, this would look familiar if you've ever done a Symfony console command. We set the name of our command to REPL. We give it a description. We give it an I gave it an alias. So we've all seen that when we did Composer list. And then the second thing is execute. These are the only two methods that you really have to implement. I have load environment that actually loads up the autoloader. That way, that's how I was able to access my example class, because I am requiring the autoloader right here before the REPL is run. Now, I just thought about this, and the autoloader may already be included at this point. I can't remember why I'm doing that, but it doesn't hurt anything. So, and then this is not really important for the purposes of our conversation here, but I'm running the REPL, which is another class I've got in here to run the SciShell REPL. And so this is all that the execution is doing. It just configures it and executes it. And then we go into our plugin. Again, this is, so for Composer, they have several interfaces you can implement. You don't have to implement all of them depending on what you're trying to do. Here I'm implementing capable, command provider, and plugin interface, because I have a plugin that provides a command. And I can't remember what the capable one does. Oh, get capabilities. So it provides this get capabilities, which tells Composer about that this class is a command provider, I think is what that's doing. And that means that it can call get commands on this. The only command I'm returning is the REPL command that I just showed you. So this is really all that's important here. Like I created a plugin with a very short class that was a command that I wanted to provide. And then I set up this plugin class, which just implements get commands and get capabilities and tells Composer about the command that I want it to be able to have. So the whole point here, though, is that like for your team, if you've got multiple projects and you want to share commands across all of these projects, well, you can't share composer.json across all the projects because that's limited to the single repository. You have to copy and paste out of that. Rather than copying and pasting to every composer.json you have, you can create your own library or your own Composer plugin that you want to share with your team that does all those things. And then every project requires that plugin as a dev dependency. All right, let me see. Oh, and the last thing to show to make it all work is in the Composer JSON for the plugin, you have to set type as Composer plugin. So that's important. Most of the time, you've probably set type to library or project. So this is a different special keyword here, composer-plugin. And then you would go into this extra object and set a property named class, which gives it the class that is the plugin class. This is the class that implements the Composer interfaces that are proper for it. Interestingly, about this type Composer plugin, if we go to Packagist, where all the Composer packages are found, we can search for Composer plugins. And in fact, over here under package type, it has Composer plugin. And let me see, let me take the query out of here because that's a little bit strange. Okay, so now we're just showing every package that is a Composer plugin that provides capabilities to Composer that does not natively have it. Actually, this is an interesting one. The fact that it shows up first is kind of cool. I was talking about it with someone else. Symphony thanks. So if we, actually, let me just pull it in to our, I'm going to stop sharing the browser and start sharing my command line, my terminal again. So we'll say Composer require dev Symphony thanks. All right, and I don't know if this is going to work for me. I may not have a GitHub token set up, but if we do Composer list again, you see that there's this thanks command now. So this gives thanks in the form of a GitHub star to your fellow PHP package maintainers. It finds all the packages you're using and then stars those for you. So we'll say Composer thanks. That's what it does. It may prompt me for a GitHub token. Oh no, I must already have it set. So it starred all of these repositories because somewhere in my dependencies, these are all being used by the ones I've already required. So it has thanked them for me. And I swear, this is the only reason I have stars on Ramsey UUID, because I think that Laravel provides this thanks command as well as just part of its default package. And so a lot of developers have just run Composer thanks, and that's how we all get stars. All right. All right, so we talked about the plugins. I want to go back. So I mentioned that like your team could end up building your own library of plugins that you can then share across all your projects. And this is something we do where I work. We have plugin like tools, a tools repository that has all the tools, and then we can pull it in, import it into any project we're working on, because we have a lot of different repositories for microservices and libraries and stuff like that. So I started creating a public one called Ramsey/DevTools. It doesn't have any code in it by itself. It mainly provides that composer type as composer plugin, and it provides the extra with the class property pointing to the class. But this package includes Ramsey/DevTools-lib. And the reason I separated them is so that anyone who wanted to use my DevTools-lib and extend it, you can't extend a composer plugin for whatever reason, but you can extend a library and then make your own plugin based on it. So that's why this, if you go read the GitHub README file, it'll explain that. So we'll require it. It also downloads a bunch of files, or a bunch of packages. You see here, though, that it also did some other special stuff at the end with CaptainHook, and I will get to CaptainHook in a minute. You can probably, if you've never heard of CaptainHook, you can probably guess what it's doing based on the messages you see right here, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. It's another awesome tool for sharing with your team. All right, so if I type composer list now, we'll see a lot of other new commands under namespaces that we did not have before. And there's even other commands up here. So these are under these namespaces. So there's analyze with analyze : PHPStan, for example. We can further, hold on one second. Sorry. I had to tell my wife to turn her volume down. All right. Okay, so we can actually, this package that I created has some configuration options that let you do some other things with it. If you read the README on it, you'll be able to find out a little bit more about it. But right now, just for the sake of this example, I will go in here. We do not yet have an extra property here. So I'm going to create a new one. Whoops. And this is not a standard practice, but it's a practice that I've started doing with packages that have configuration options, is to namespace them under extra with the name of the package. So in this case, the package name is Ramsey/DevTools, and then within that is an object that has the configuration for that package. This is not like a standardized way of doing this. It's the way I've been doing it. This package has an option called command-prefix. So we've set it to dev. So we can see what that does when we type composer list. So now all of our commands are namespaced under dev, and we can type dev : analyze PHPStan, dev : analyze PHPStan, or I'm sorry, Psalm. This just kind of like helps separate things out and helps you find them. It's also very useful because you can list things by namespace. So we can say composer list dev, and it gives us just the commands that are in that namespace. Also, let's go into composer JSON. Since this provides dev test all, which is also aliased to just dev test, we're going to go in here and remove our test. We don't need that anymore. Now we have provided a shared command that does these things that we can then import into all of our projects. So now when I run composer test, it does the same thing. Actually, you see an error there. I'll explain that in a minute. But it runs all of those again. This error is because I must have that set up somewhere in the DevTools library, and it's not accommodating a case when you don't have this path available. So I need to fix that, but that's on me to fix. That's not a problem here. But at any rate, that's just storing PHP code sniffers cache to a location. But it ran all of our tests here, found no errors, as we would expect it to do. Some other things that we can do here is I have set this up. I'm doing this off the cuff now because I just thought about it. So give me a second. I want to show how, here we go. Oh, this is the wrong library. Hold on. You don't see my screen. Sorry. I'm just, I'm trying to get to the README file for DevTools. Oh, here we go. So I can remember what this should look like. Okay. So you can see, if I say composer list dev, I have this command in here called dev lint PDS. This uses a project called PDS skeleton that sort of verifies that your project layout and structure is in a common format. So you can go take a look at the PDS skeleton project and find out more information about it. But when I run it, it outputs something like this that kind of checks to look. So for example, if I had, here, I'll do this. So if I had a directory named scripts, it might complain when I run this. Yes, incorrect scripts present, because the common kind of nomenclature for these things, this tool was put together with a lot of research. It went through a lot of PHP packages and found out the common structure that they all had. And then it created a kind of a standard based on that, based on the fact that everyone had been doing it this way. So that's clearly the standard, right? It's not a standards body. But in this case, it's looking, it wants that to be named bin instead of scripts. So if I move scripts to bin, now when I run it, it says correct bin present. All right, even though there's nothing in it. But if I want that to run as part of my test, I can go into my composer JSON and go to this extra section again. And I think it's called commands. Yes, commands. So commands, I can extend my commands. I have a test command in here that already does some stuff, but I want it to do some more stuff. And I can do that by actually calling an existing composer command like this. I've already forgot, lint PDS. So you can call other composer scripts, even scripts you have here. Whoops. Actually, we can do this as an array, just like I showed you with scripts. We can do it. It basically follows the same format that the scripts section up here does. And I can call hello as well, right? Because I defined that up there. So when I now run composer test, it's going to run all the stuff that is configured by, oh, why didn't it do that? Maybe I named something wrong. Hold on. It should have called it, but maybe it doesn't work on the alias. Let me, oh, you know what? It doesn't work on, yeah, it can't have the alias or the command prefix, I think is what I had in the documentation. I don't remember my own documentation. My point here isn't to show off the capabilities of dev tools, though. It's to show off like things you can do with a plugin. You can create you can read in your own configuration that you want to have in a specific project that changes the behavior of your plugin. And that's what I'm really showing here. So let me do this and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to move on because this isn't important for the talk. Yeah, I'll need to figure out why that's not working. It should be working. So I apologize that it's not working. This is the beauty of live coding. All right. I showed what can be done with a plugin. That was the point here, is to say that you can take all the stuff you're doing and bundle it into a plugin that can then be shared across your projects. The next thing I wanted to talk about, though, because we talked about CaptainHook, or I should have pointed out CaptainHook earlier, is I want to include that as well and show what it does. And actually, it's already been included because it was in Dev Tools, but I'm going to require it a little bit differently with CaptainHook / plugin Composer. And this is a plugin for Composer that CaptainHook also created, which also happens to require the base CaptainHook library. So you don't have to use its Composer plugin if you don't want to, but it can be very useful because if you include the plugin as part of your development, then when a developer clones your repository, or when they do a new checkout from your repository, it will then install the hooks that you have configured in CaptainHook.json. So we'll look at that in a minute. All right, so it tells me we're using CaptainHook.json. So as you might have guessed, this sets up Git hooks. If you're not familiar with Git hooks, they're all located in the Git database folder of a repository you have checked out if you're using Git. If you're not using Git, I'm sorry, I don't have a corollary to talk about with like Subversion or Mercurial or whatever. But if you are using Git, which a lot of people are, you'll always have this hidden Git folder in your local checkout. Within that is a hooks folder. And in that hooks folder, you will see a bunch of files. Now, most of them will all end in .sample if you don't have a hook set up. But because I ran the CaptainHook installer, it automatically set up some hooks for me. One of the hooks that you're probably most familiar with if you use hooks is the pre-commit hook. This means that this hook runs. So if you type git commit, this hook will run first before it makes the commit. And if any failure exit code comes out of any script that it runs, then it will block the commit. So, and then hopefully, like depending on how you have it set up, hopefully it'll be giving you an error message on screen so you know what you need to fix. That's up to the tool, though, that you're using. In this case, though, CaptainHook is very simple. It has, it's going to call CaptainHook and vendor bin, and it tells CaptainHook where your configuration file is, and it tells it where your bootstrap is, and it calls hook : pre-commit. That's it. That's all this is going to do. You're not actually calling this directly because the pre-commit hook is. So I can actually, so I have some changes that I've made, and I also want to, I want to look at my CaptainHook JSON. This is where this is getting important for our discussion here. And that is in this CaptainHook JSON file, I can then set all the actions I want to happen for any given hook that I want to enable. And when this is part of your repository, and when CaptainHook self-installs after cloning or checking out from a branch, all of your other team members will automatically have the hooks installed, and then those hooks will use this configuration file. So if you want something to happen in pre-commit or pre-push or whatever else is in here, like right now there's a commit message that validates the format of your commit messages, then this will happen for your whole team. So let's take a look. In pre-commit, I just have hello, echo hello. I don't want that to be my action. I just put that in there for the sake of something to be there. I want to run composer test. So I can just give it any command line command to run. I can specify any number of these that I want. So in fact, I could do, if I was doing, this is all going to be executed as if it's from the root of your repository. That's how the pre-commit hook is going to work. I'm sorry, that's how the Git hooks will work. So you can say vendor bin PHPUnit, and then do the same thing with another command, for example. We don't have to pass options or conditions at all. Those just happen to be other properties you can pass. If the hook action that you're working with has options, and that comes into play like up here. You can also use a fully qualified class name, like is happening here, that actually implements a interface from CaptainHook to make it an action that runs when this Git hook runs. And these are the options that would pass in to that class so that it knows that, like in this case, my commit messages should have a subject length of no longer than 50 characters and a body line length of no longer than 72 characters, which basically means it's going to wrap the body to 72 characters, which is what like standard old email rules were. Anyway, that's the important part there, is that like we can point to a fully qualified class name that implements that interface. And down here, we can also just point to command line commands. I'm not going to use these individually, though. I'm going to actually just go make it simple and do composer test. We want composer test to run on like before commits. If there's a failure, we want it to block our commit, basically. So let's see. Let's do, we'll add things. We'll add that. And then in my composer file, I've got a bunch of this new stuff added because we've required things. So we'll say yes to that. I want to illustrate what happens when it blocks. So I'm going to go to example.php and have a coding standard failure. And we can see that working if I say composer dev lint, just lint, okay. So I also have auto completion set up for composer commands, which is pretty nice. I think that my shell automatically has it set up. I think there's a plugin for it, but there are other tools that you can do to do composer tab completion. Goodness, why does it do that? All right, make directory build, because it's clearly looking for that. Make directory build cache. I thought it would make this for me. Okay, there we go. So we got an error telling us that the opening brace of the class must be on the next line after the definition, right? Following PSR 12. Now I want to do, I've staged my commits, or staged what I want to be committed. In fact, let me stage that as well. And I want to commit. And it's going to fail. It might take a little bit because it has, oh, why did it do that? Oh, it did fail. I'm sorry. We're just looking at the bottom. So when it fails, it outputs the output from the error. If it passes, it just says passed and doesn't show you the output. So we happen to be down here at the bottom and that confused me. But yes, here's our failure. And it didn't let me commit, right? So let's go fix example.php. Let's add that back and let's commit now. So for a split second, you'll see done. Actually, it says done. And then it took me to Vim as my editor. So I'm going to say did some stuff and watch what happens now because I have the commit message hook also set. Now it found a problem with my commit message. It spits out the entire message. I might submit a pull request to change this. In my opinion, this is just kind of polluting everything and not showing you where the problem really is. This is just comments. It's never going to be part of the commit message. So the commit message is did some stuff, which has a problem. The subject line has to start with an uppercase letter, according to the Chris Beam's school of thought for a commit message. So we'll git commit again. This says done. And now I'll say did some stuff with a capital D. All right, and that passed. Okay, so.